On one hand, it's exciting to be making a film that searches for the truth about the Exodus. On the other hand, I must admit, I'm a reluctant participant. I never wanted to go to the Middle East. I never wanted to be involved in controversy, because it means taking on the giants of archaeology, religion, and tradition.
The exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt and their journey to the Promised Land is one of the most influential and important stories in all of world history.
The stories in the Bible are the most powerful narratives ever told. It's not a coincidence that this book has held the imagination of mankind for thousands of years, because the stories are remarkable.
It's the most amazing book if you think about it. It's a book that covers about 4,000 years of history, and it really is the first history book until the time of the Greeks. Herodotus was supposed to be the first historian, but in fact I think Moses was.
He remains, without any competition, the greatest legislator of our time. And I thought the 10 Commandments that he brought down from Sinai is the foundation of our civilization. Take away the 10 Commandments and we're out of business.
Yet against the idea that the biblical account is true, voices across our culture and around the world are raised in protest. These voices say that the biblical narrative is nothing more than a myth, a fairy tale, and their antagonistic claims appear to be supported by the findings of modern archaeology.
Exodus did not happen in the way that it is described in the text on the background of the 13th century BC.
I don't believe there was a single event that we can call the Exodus, archaeologically or historically.
It's 24 minutes past the hour on the Michael Medved Show, your daily dose of debate. And right now, debating some of the most important questions with Rabbi David Wolpe, who leads one of America's largest Jewish congregations.
In 2001, Rabbi Wolpe created a national furor when his Passover sermon challenged the historical reality of the Exodus. Rabbi Wolpe, what did you say?
I said that the Exodus certainly didn't happen the way the Bible depicted it, assuming that it was a historical event in any description. I think that if you look at it scientifically, it's virtually indefensible to make the Bible's case. But you also have to understand that your faith isn't based on splitting seas or archaeological digs. It's based on something much deeper.
But if these are not facts, if this is a fairy story, if this is fabricated somehow, doesn't that undermine the religious meaning? In other words, doesn't that change
things? The extent to which it has a historical core is very hard to say, but my deeper conviction about it is that it's a story that whether it was true, it is true. And those are two different things.
That seems to be evading...
Well, in other words, things that aren't facts can be truths.
What part of the Torah would you grant to be based upon historical reality?
I can't tell you. I don't know. And although it may irk people, I don't care.
If the leading scholars agree with the most outspoken atheists and agnostics, if even some rabbis agree with the most skeptical archaeologists that there's no evidence at all that the Exodus ever really happened, then what are the rest of us supposed to think? If none of it happened, then the two religions of the Bible, Judaism and Christianity, are both based on a gigantic lie. It was the type of question that troubled a filmmaker from Minneapolis named Tim Mahoney. As he probed more deeply, little did Mahoney realize how far his journey would take him.
The more I looked into the Exodus, the more I realized its significance. I knew I had to investigate this story for myself. And the first step was to explore whether there was any hard evidence for the Exodus at all. I began my journey by traveling to the very place the Bible says it happened, the ancient land of Egypt. I was raised as a Christian, and I remember hearing amazing stories from the Bible as a child, and I believed them. Stories about an ancient family of shepherds, the sons of Jacob, who came from a foreign land to Egypt. They were enslaved by the Pharaoh, then miraculously delivered out of Egypt, and journeyed across the desert to conquer the promised land. But as I grew older, I was challenged to lose those beliefs. Now, I just wanted to know the truth.
The Exodus is believed by most scholars to have occurred in the reign of Ramesses II. Ramesses was Egypt's greatest builder king. Were these mighty monuments built on the sweat and toil of Hebrew slaves?
If experts say there's no evidence during the time of Ramesses, why do they think he's the Pharaoh of the Exodus? I'm no historian, so I had to find a way to visualize how the history of ancient Egypt related to the events of the Bible. The thought came to me to imagine a wall of time extending back to the earliest moments of civilization. On the first level, Egyptian history, and above it, the events recorded in the Bible. And at the bottom, a timeline of absolute dates and a movable base to gauge the events of history, with great pylons marking every 1,000 years.
Over the course of 2,000 years, Egypt experienced three great periods of power. It began with the Old Kingdom, with its great pyramids of stone. Then came the Middle Kingdom, the high point of art and literature. Finally, the New Kingdom, with its vast empires that dominated foreign lands. These great periods of power were followed by dark periods of disunity and weakness. Ramesses II was a pharaoh of the New Kingdom who ruled a grand empire and filled Egypt with his monuments. There's one crucial passage in the Bible that leads many to chain the Exodus event to the time of Pharaoh Ramesses, and what is known as the Ramesses Exodus theory.
The key to that theory is the building of the city of Ramesses, mentioned in Exodus 1:11. The Hebrews are making bricks to build the city of Ramesses, or the storage facilities of Ramses.
Professor James Hoffmeyer is one of the few Egyptologists who has written extensively on the biblical Exodus.
This important city, which we know Ramses II built, it's being excavated even as we speak and continues to be studied. This city has a very brief history. By around 1100 BC, the city's gone. It has a very narrow history of no more than 200 years. So the question is, if this building project that the Israelites are involved in is Ramses II's Delta residence, then we have no escape but to say this is an important chronological marker, and that can only be somewhere in the 13th century BC.
Dates in the BC period can be confusing to work with because they move in the opposite direction to modern AD dates. The farther back you go in time, the bigger the BC number. So the Ramesses Exodus theory places the Exodus about 250 years before 1000 BC, or at about 1250 BC. I wanted an Egyptian perspective, so I went to see Mansour Barayak, Director General of Antiquities for Luxor, one of Egypt's most important archaeological sites. I asked Mansour if he was in agreement that there was no evidence for the early Israelites or the Exodus in Egypt.
Nobody knows what the sand of Egypt can tell of secrets. Maybe in the excavation we'll find some evidences. But so far, there is no documented evidence about the Exodus. But we know the Exodus from the Holy Books. It's mentioned in Quran, in Holy Quran. It's in the Holy Bible. But in the ground, we have no evidence.
Well, it wasn't as if I hadn't heard this before, but I was still hopeful of finding something in the ruins of this magnificent civilization. What I really needed, though, was physical evidence of the cultural group that the Israelites were a part of, Semites, coming down to live in Egypt from a land called Canaan.
The problem is that no archaeological evidence has turned up for these Semites in the city built by Ramesses II.
But then I heard of something that seemed astonishing. New archaeological discoveries of a city and a people that appeared to match the biblical story, made at the very location of the city of Ramesses, where the Bible places the Israelites.
Mahoney would be interviewing one of the world's most respected Egyptologists. Professor Manfred Bietak and his Austrian team have been digging in Egypt's delta for over 30 years at the site of Avaris. Avaris lies directly below the southern sector of the city of Ramesses.
I asked Manfred to tell me about these exciting new finds.
So we uncovered the remains of a huge town of 250 hectares with a population of approximately 25,000 to 30,000 individuals. These were people who originated from Canaan, Syria, Palestine. Originally, they may have come here as subjects of the Egyptian crown or with the blessing of the Egyptian crown. Obviously, this town enjoyed something like a special status, like a free zone, something like that.
This sounded exactly like the Bible. Pharaoh gave his blessing by allowing the early Israelites to freely settle in the best part of Egypt. Once there, they and their flocks prospered and multiplied greatly. This was just what I was looking for. So I asked him, could these foreigners be the early Israelites?
We have some evidence of shepherders. We find again and again in this area pits with goats and sheep. So we know shepherders, probably Bedouins with huge herds roamed around this. But to connect this with the Proto-Israelites is a very vague affair.
I was stunned when Manfred said it was a weak affair. Why couldn't these be the Israelites when they matched the Bible story so well?
According to my opinion, the settlement of the Proto-Israelites in Canaan only happened from the 12th century BC onwards.
What Manfred was telling me is that the physical evidence of these people is centuries too early to be connected to the events of the Exodus. This is profound, because no Israelites in Egypt means no Exodus, and no Exodus means that the foundation of Judaism is a myth. And for Christians, it means Jesus Christ and the writers of the New Testament got it wrong, because they all accepted the reality of Moses and the Exodus and built their teachings on them. I returned home from Egypt. I wanted to be open-minded, but as I replayed the interview in my thoughts, a cold chill came over me. All my life I had believed the Bible stories to be true. I know some people say, you don't need any evidence, just have faith. But if there's no hard evidence for any of it, Had I been believing in a lie all this time? And what about my kids and grandkids? What should they put their faith in? Whether you believe these stories or not, isn't it important to know what's really true? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't stop now, no matter how hard it would be. I made a decision. I had to go back to Egypt.
Mahoney arranged to meet with one of America's leading Egyptologists, Professor Kent Weeks. He rediscovered KV-5, the tomb of the sons of Ramesses II in the Valley of the Kings. He brought up a crucial issue when considering the problems with these events.
Ramses II is the pharaoh of the Exodus. How can we prove that? Chronology doesn't really help. The chronology of Egypt is still a bit ambiguous. Correlations between Egyptian chronology and that of other cultures in the ancient Near East is even more confusing. We don't know precisely when the Exodus happened. Some people say it was Ramses II. It makes nice theater because he was a great, powerful ruler. Everybody knows his name. He built fantastic monuments. Everything really is appealing to have him be the one to choose.
Because he'd be a very large opponent, wouldn't he?
He would be indeed. So yeah, pick Ramses II as the pharaoh of the Exodus, but other Egyptologists disagree. Almost any pharaoh could be the pharaoh of the Exodus if we can prove there even was an Exodus.
But if Ramesses wasn't the pharaoh of the Exodus, then who was? Looking for the Exodus in a different time or reign could be the solution. Maybe Ramesses is the problem. I found Mansour's openness refreshing.
Scientifically, you have to open your mind to all the opinion, read it by yourself. Don't let anybody affect in what you believe. But also, on the other hand, you have to accept the other opinion. Your opinion are not always the right opinion. You have to accept the other opinion. And debate with me, discuss. You can convince me, or shall I convince you? Leave it to the public to judge. We have a myth, we have a story, it is in the holy books. Who knows? And then you will come with a conclusion. And this conclusion will be in front of the public. The public can judge.
It was clear I needed a new approach.